Welcome to the Liberty Lobbyist Delegate. You're not a representative, Delegate, Chris Anders. Thanks for joining me.
Oh, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here, Melissa.
Yeah, so you are the prime sponsor of HB 5090 in West Virginia, and this is a bill that would end all of the K through 12 and daycare vaccine mandates in West Virginia. But West Virginia has a very interesting and storied history regarding these vaccine mandates. And that's why I wanted to have you on today, because you are the only red state in America without religious exemptions for those mandates. Is that
Well,
correct?
Correct. In fact, we're one of 5 states in the entire union that does not have religious exemptions. And I would question whether or not we're a red state. The voters vote red. But unfortunately, that's not how the votes are counted in Charleston. So one would argue whether or not we're actually truly a red state, or we have a lot of red voters that unfortunately have been tricked by the undocumented Democrats who run as Republicans and still refuse to allow any exemptions on these draconian vaccine laws.
So, I would assume you've had vaccine mandates in some way or another since, the 1930s, 40s, like the rest of the country. I read, though, that you've had like 60 some odd attempts legislatively at creating religious exemptions. Have any of them gotten to the governor ever?
Not a single one has gotten to the governor. The governor did put out a executive order that said that the state had to accept the religious or philosophical exemptions. I personally don't believe there should be any mandates because I'm a constitutionalist. I looked at the United States Constitution, I looked at the West Virginia State Constitution, and nowhere in either one of those is declared the power for politicians to decide what's injected in a child's body. So obviously, I always side on with the Constitution and freedom and liberty. But yeah, there's been many, many attempts. There was a huge floor fight last year where 12 delegates flipped their vote from a Friday to a Monday. Now, who they talked to was his lobbyist or their friends or who knows who they spoke to. But they voted one way on a Friday, and when the bill was on passage on third reading, which was just a religious exemption bill, just solely a religious exemption bill, it failed on the floor just a week after we had passed the Parental Bill of Rights, which specifically stated that parents are the final quote unquote decider on their children's health care. So they passed this resolution that had no teeth. And then when it really counted, when the chips were down and it counted to actually put teeth to that, they flipped their votes. And unfortunately, we've been dealing with this. The executive order from the governor was upheld in Raleigh County. They made it a class action suit. A bunch of my constituents went the following Monday to enroll their children in school because of the.
Yeah, hold on. Let's backtrack a little bit on that story as far as the executive order, because I do want to get into that. That's just it's alarming to me that out of like 50, 60 attempts, nothing's ever reached the governor's desk. That's so crazy to me. But so let's go backwards. So we're now right after the Trump administration begins. Some type of letter was sent to West Virginia. Now you have a new governor as well. A letter is sent from, what was it, DOJ or HHS or both? What was it?
I think it was HHS, I believe.
Okay. And what did the letter say?
It essentially said that West Virginia needs to look into and should have religious exemptions, right? Mm-hmm. Which is common sense. That's what the majority of states do. That's constitutional, stunning, right? But at the same time, we shouldn't have to have the federal government to come in to tell us that we need to follow the Constitution. Every one of us puts our hands on the Bible when we are sworn in, and we swear an oath to the Constitution, not to anything else, but strictly to the Constitution. And the Constitution is a compact. It does not give this power to government. So obviously, The correct thing is to eliminate these mandates.
Right. So, as a response, the governor issues an executive order making religious exemptions. And then what happened?
Well, and philosophical exemptions.
Okay.
Then there was a huge war with the appointed Board of Education at the state level. They are not elected, they have no voter accountability. It became a huge conflict. They refused to accept the governor's executive order. So it went to court. There was many cases around the state, but the primary one happened in Raleigh County, where the judge made it a class action suit that said that anybody, past or present, that files the religious or philosophical exemption with the executive branch and is granted, that schools have to allow them to attend and they have to honor this exemption. When that happened, of course, there was a lot of cheering. Everybody's excited. Yes, we won. Had constituents literally try to enroll their kids the following Monday, and the superintendent superintendent of Berkeley County Schools stood and refused to allow them, regardless of what the court said, because their lawyers told them not to honor it. Okay, now keep in mind, their lawyers are paid by our tax dollars. So
Right.
this is West Virginians' tax dollars being used to essentially contempt the court. They weren't following the judge's ruling. So then we were working to put in contempt of court charges. Like that's it. I called the state police. I called the prosecuting attorney. I had a lot of phone calls with the governor's office. I'm like, I want somebody cuffed over this. This is a judge's order. And as soon as they knew we were filing the contempt of court charges, the Supreme Court of West Virginia shows up off of vacation, puts a stay on the judge's ruling, and then disappears again. So now we're stuck with a stay on this ruling. The legislature doesn't have the guts to act. It doesn't have the guts to empower parents to make the right decisions for the children. They think they have, some sort of divine right, like somebody, Lady of the Lake handed them a sword and said, "You have to decide the medical care of all children in West Virginia." So everybody's out in limbo right now, and it's frustrating. Trust me, I have helped. We had a huge floor fight. I spoke a lot last year. We can't even get a bill out of the health committee of the House to do anything. And that is with 22 Republicans and only 3 Democrats. So are those 22 really Republicans? That's the real question to ask.
You bring up an interesting issue. A friend of mine wrote an excellent op-ed here in New Hampshire last year, and I think it was called "Conservatives Have a Personnel Problem." And it really, kind of scratched an itch for me reading it, because we had years ago, when I was in the legislature, one of my bills was adding on to the Patient Bill of Rights, saying that no patient could be denied medical treatment for not refusing a vaccine. And that is law in New Hampshire. And then what happened was that the biggest hospital system in the state, which is the only hospital system that does transplants, I found out that they were denying transplants if you didn't get vaccines. And so I raised holy hell about it and could not get the attorney general to do anything, essentially. And no one lifted a finger in law enforcement to enforce the laws that I had worked very hard to pass into law, until the Speaker of the House put out a very public letter, basically, slapping this hospital around and saying that they needed to, he embarrassed them enough that then the Attorney General felt that he needed to step in and make this all go away, and they did have to change their policy. Okay, so. But what I found interesting about that was that it was the legislature in that case that basically had to make a PR campaign to make law enforcement actually do their job. And so when I think about this executive order, what really stands so firmly to me is that it's always the other side, right? The authoritarians are like, yeah, I'm good. We don't need to follow that, or we don't even need to follow a judge's orders. Okay. But it's our side who just rolls over. I mean, where was the enforcement from the state to just enforce the executive order to begin with?
Well, correct. And I called the state police on the way down to see the superintendent. They did show up finally because I think they were worried that there's going to be a scrum, if you will, down there. There were some very angry parents. I was very angry. It wasn't a very friendly meeting whatsoever. But you mentioned the Speaker of the House actually stood up and said something. Now, keep in mind, the Speaker of the House of West Virginia is a partner in Bowles Rice, which is a law firm that was representing Berkeley County. Now, let that settle in for just 1 minute. I have requested, and I have some figures, and there's going to be an email going out to probably 30,000 of my closest friends in West Virginia. But it looks like several hundred thousand taxpayer dollars have been spent with Bowles Rice to defend these draconian vaccine laws. So there's a lot of conflicts of interest, you might want to say. And the way we get out of that is, first of all, school boards at the county level are up on the ballot this May. We need to make primaries great again. Just waiting to the general election and voting for evil A over evil B doesn't do any good.
Well, so let's get into that. So, and we'll come back to the vaccine bill, but you are chairman of the West Virginia Freedom Caucus. Is that correct?
That is correct. That would be
I
me.
believe that the State Freedom Caucus Network is the best vehicle tool that we have as conservatives for political change in America. And the reason for that is because all of the problems that you're describing are fairly endemic in most red states, right? Where, yes, because people just turn out to vote for general elections, and you're in an overwhelmingly Republican state, they're not going to vote for the Democrat. We have a couple of issues. Democrats run as Republicans, and then they get through. People sleep through primaries. They do not vet in primaries, and they don't even know. People, you think that the swamp is down in DC. You have absolutely no idea. The real swamps are actually in your state legislatures for the most part. Because no one pays attention. People pay a hell of a lot more attention to what happens in DC than they do at their own state capital. And so they get away with it year after year, cycle after cycle. And what I love about the State Freedom Caucus Network is that you actually, for the first time, have resources available to start making the voters understand what is happening in their backyard.
Absolutely. We just launched last week, and I was elected chairman. So we're actually having a meeting here a little bit later this evening to discuss the primary elections as well as a few other housekeeping items. Because unless people show up and understand there is a clear difference between this candidate with an R beside their name and this candidate with an R beside their name, we're going to continue to have real problems. Because you're right, the swamp is horrible down here at the state capitol. We have many floor fights where you'll end up with maybe 20 conservative real Republicans voting with us, and the remaining 71, let me get that number right, 71 Republicans siding with what would essentially be Democrat ideas. Because what happened was West Virginia changed from blue to supposedly red around 2014 to 2016. You had a lot of politicians just swapping out their team jerseys so they could stay into power. That's not why I ran. Constitution doesn't give me power over people. It's my job to get their freedom and their liberty back, and that's the goal of the Freedom Caucus. And we're going to be very, very active in the primaries. And there's quite a few other organizations that are looking at our primaries, like Young Americans for Liberty, Make Liberty Win. Quite a few groups of really West Virginians for Health Freedom have really honed in on these primaries. And the really good part, is there are more insurgent candidates on the primary ballot. I think there's somewhere around 40, 42 than we've ever seen in 20 years. So hopefully our efforts last session in forcing roll call votes and forcing people on the record so people understood where their representatives really stand has now borne fruit. So the key is, in an off-year election, in the primary, your vote matters so much more, right? And you can make such total environmental change in our state. So I'm imploring everyone who believes in freedom, the Constitution, whether it's medical freedom or just liberty, to get involved, understand the candidates on your primary ballot, and vote like your liberty depends on it, because it does.
The State Freedom Caucus networks I've noticed who have been the most successful in primaries spend, and again, this is a labor of love, but they spend a tremendous amount of time out on the road, going to like GOP meetings, town meetings, and because it's a matter of pushing out that message of yes, yeah, when you're in the chamber, obviously you have to force the roll calls, but you have to force those roll calls out to the public so that they understand who's voting what way. People that have majority of voters don't know what a single bill is that's ever being voted on in their state legislature ever.
Absolutely.
So getting that message out there is the real key. Being out there on the road, building that email list, and letting people see, because they don't agree with these things. If you're a Republican voter, you are not actually agreeing with these people on these issues. So let's go back to the bill. Well, in general, vaccine mandates and the just slog that you've been in over this religious exemption issue. What is the primary argument against having a religious exemption?
Because I guess what I've heard in between a lot of the excuses that they use is that we know better than you do, and the hospital association says that we have to force these vaccines into you, making representatives essentially salespeople for these pharmaceutical products, right? Which is what's happening. And every time it's brought up, the hospital association, big pharma will show up all in their white lab coats. You know, it's going to be a fun day when the white lab coats show up, because apparently that means they're smarter than the rest of us. And they'll show up and they'll argue how everybody's going to die, and it'll be all our fault, and all these children are going to pass away because they didn't take vaccines. Now, keep in mind, we're not saying whether or not to take a vaccine. I'm not a doctor. My wife's a PA, but I'm not a doctor, and I'm not going to tell anybody what they should be putting in their children. That is up to them to decide. Okay. That's what freedom looks like. Everybody has the choice of deciding, right? We don't have the nanny state coming down and putting its boot on our throat and telling us what we must do. So yeah, it's nonstop. They show up, the lobbyists show up. You almost want to believe they're sitting there texting donations into certain people's accounts to get them to vote their way. And I think I honestly saw that last year. So that being said, it's sad. It's the opposite of what the people want. And when you talk to the people on the street, I door knocked on 6,000 doors in my last election. Right, about 1 out of every 5 voters brought this up to me. I'm absolutely for freedom. I'm not going to tell you what you have to be vaccinated for, or tell you what you can't be vaccinated for. That's your choice. Okay, I'm not. The Constitution does not allow me to rule over the people. Right, that's one thing we've got to somehow beat into the minds of a lot of politicians. They're not here to rule over the people. Their position exists to protect the freedom of the people that they serve. And we need to make that very clear.
Absolutely. In my experience, you got my Republicans that I struggle with on this issue of ending all mandates. So I have a end all mandate bill also that I'm working on, and they just believe that vaccines are so vital and so important that they are the one exception to this idea that you can choose for yourself. That people have to be forced to do the right thing, right, in quotes. And I brought up the Nuremberg Code in my testimony for the bill, and one of the representatives on the committee who is sort of on the fence about this issue, he said, but there had to have been an exception in Nuremberg about times when it would be okay to mandate medical intervention. And I said, well, no, Representative, that is actually not, there was no qualifier. It was said to be a human right, that if you do not have informed consent, which is the ability to say no, that is a violation of your human rights. And let's just say he was not there for the committee vote. So I think he couldn't quite get over his issues, but he allowed himself to be subbed in and the bill did pass committee. But which, hey, I mean, fine. Like, I'm not like calling you out for that or anything, but that seems to be the one like thing that they cannot get over, is that they're just so important that you would have to force people, because maybe the people are just not smart enough to make those correct choices in their minds for themselves. Then on the other flip side, we had Democrats. I was in and out of a couple of committees, and I was in a different committee at the same time that the no mandates hearing was in, and a Democrat was in there, and she was talking about vaccines, and she said, and right now down the hall, there's a bill to end the entire childhood schedule. And I actually audibly gasped, because I was like, no one's taking away your vaccines. Like, go for it, lady. I would never presume to do that. The only difference, if we get rid of the mandate, is when the child gets 5 years old and goes off to kindergarten, they don't need to hand government a little permission slip saying that I either did or I did not get my vaccines. But anyway, I digress. So those are the main arguments that you're having. And you seem to have a lot of issues with lobbyists. And hey, I'm not saying I don't have those issues. My issues with the lobbyists are very much in the Senate, because we have 24 senators, but we have 400 representatives. Right. So, and what that means for everybody out there who doesn't know how campaigning works, that means that you need a lot of money, because it's dollars per vote, right? And so you need a tremendous amount of money to run a Senate campaign and almost no money to run a House campaign. And so therefore, the House people don't care what the lobbyists say, and the lobbyists rule over in the Senate, where they need a lot of money for campaigns. So tell me, what is an average House campaign cost?
Well, for example, my last House campaign was $46,000, because I had a very competitive primary where the establishment rhinos were trying to, they invented things to say about me. I learned something new every day as the mail showed up. That was wonderful. And then, of course, the rhinos then teamed up. Literally, the outgoing president of the Senate, who was a Republican, his daughter is out door knocking with my Democratic opponent. Right? And I fully expect that to happen this cycle as well. Now, there are a lot of lobbyists, yes, but there are happy hours every single night where you can drink free on the lobbyists. There are dinners where you can eat free by sitting down with the lobbyist. I haven't been to one yet, and I will not go to one. Lobbyists have stopped coming by my office because they know I'm going to vote how I'm going to vote, no matter what trinkles or baubles. And you always have to remember that in Proverbs 23, when Solomon, who was a king in the king business, said, when you sit and dine with a ruler, note well what is before you. And if you're given the gluttony, put a knife to your own throat, because those delicacies are deceptive. And that's what happens when you go out and drink with lobbyists and get all the free booze, or you go out and eat with lobbyists and get all the free food. Nothing's free in this world except the grace of God. So that being said, and a lot of them are just going along to get along. Well, I don't want to make my friends mad. I want to go to this happy hour next week, or whatever the case may be. I have not eaten a single meal or had a single drink from a lobbyist, and I never will. Now, do I agree with, like, when Young Americans for Liberty shows up, or Students for Life, or many in West Virginia for Health Freedom? Absolutely. Will I eat on their dime? Absolutely not. So I think it's a matter of, yes, there are lobbyists, but it takes representatives with the wherewithal and the guts to say, you know what, that's great, too bad, I'm not interested. I saw a dinner, there were 9 delegates at, that cost the county, now this is another issue, cost the county of Berkeley County somewhere around $1,500, because we still have taxpayer funded lobbying. So lobbyists are being paid by people's tax money to come down here and wine and dine politicians. There's something really wrong about that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, taxpayer funded lobbying is an interesting. I don't think that any state has actually managed to pass a ban on taxpayer funded lobbying, if I'm right. And what's wild is, I run a grassroots liberty organization. Obviously, I have aligned people on my list, and we don't ever actually take a position on that bill. It's just not like our issue. But I'll get emails from people on my list who are aligned who are enraged about the ban on taxpayer funded lobbying. And usually, while they may claim to be conservative, and I actually think that they are either on like a town council or a school board. And New Hampshire Municipal Association does an amazing job at convincing these people that they are needed for them, like that they provide them information that otherwise they would just be completely just be flying blind. And I I've had to very gently kind of respond and be like, the New Hampshire Municipal Association, I promise you, is not your friend. I am in Concord all the time. I am always lobbying on the opposite side of the New Hampshire Municipal Association, because then they are going in there and they are selling away your freedom at the highest price, no matter what.
Well, for example, my county, Berkeley County, pays a lobbyist $16,000 a month. $16,000 a month to lobby the legislature. Last year, they were using these $16,000 a month of taxpayer dollars to lobby for a sales tax increase. So they're using people's taxpayer dollars to lobby and wine and dine politicians to increase the taxes on the people, right? It's totally mind blowing. And you're right. The people in the system love taxpayer funded lobbying because then they themselves don't have to pick up the phone and call up their representative and ask them. They have a professional for this, a professional paid out of your pockets. Now, the bill did pass the Texas State Senate, but it never cleared the House. So that did happen this past spring. Actually, I think it was a special session. But it didn't clear the House. Now, I have that bill in West Virginia. Of course, I'm making a lot of friends back home with my county commission, but that's okay. It's the right thing to do. I don't want to see people's money being used to push ideas that they oppose. So that's why I also am working on banning taxpayer-funded lobbying and quite a few other things that's made the Berkeley County Commission just love me.
HB 5090, where is it in the process?
That bill is sitting, waiting to be taken up. It's in the Health Committee. And like I said, the Health Committee, we have 22 Republicans and only 3 Democrats. And the bill hasn't made it to the agenda because also keep in mind, you know what it's like. If you're voting your conscience and not a team player, but you're doing what you deem to be the right thing, the Speaker of the House won't let your bills run. Right? I'm sure you've experienced that one before.
We actually have a special rule in New Hampshire that every single bill must get a hearing and every single bill must have a vote by the full body. So we actually don't have that.
Right, but that's what I'm working towards next time. Because
We're
elected, we need to allow, because having one person decide what bills actually run, it's like an 8th grade lunch table. And so we're going to work to have it set up so we don't have a king as a speaker, that the speaker doesn't determine this. 1 out of 100 delegates should not be able to say whose bill runs, because I fought the speaker last year on quite a few bills. I'm known to pick fights and I will not back down. I won't compromise and I won't sell out. And that being the case, they just kind of ignore my legislation. But there's a good group of us in the Freedom Caucus that are going to push very hard and reaching out to others to change the rules we adopt for the next year, so that every single bill, you might not be able to introduce 50. I think I have 52, 53 in. They put limits and say you can introduce 20, but every one of them gets a vote at least in committee. So I'm looking forward to that. I really am, because people don't understand what's happening down here. They might watch Fox News, they might watch CNN or MSNBC, but they really need to tune in every day to what I call Criminal Minds, or the legislature in action, and watch and see actually what happens, right? Because one motivated person in a state delegate race in the primary, where there might be 1,500 total votes, if one person dedicated 3 hours a day for a month, they could change who their state representative was.
100%. No, that is totally.
So they need to watch and understand. I've got an email list of somewhere around 30,000 in the state now, and I keep putting the information out. And of course, I get yelled at a good bit by the other delegates. Why are you telling people this? Why did you put out the roll call vote? Because the hard light of truth makes the cockroaches scramble away.
Oh, absolutely. Oh, I love you. You're definitely right up my alley. But yeah, no, I always say New Hampshire's superpower is that number one, we have a 400-person legislature, but number two is our rule that every single bill must have a public hearing. Every single bill must have a vote by the full body. You can't hold anything in committee. Committee can't kill a bill. And I got to tell you, all they do is give a recommendation, inexpedient to legislate or ought to pass. And we flip, inexpedient to legislate on the floor all the time. It happens constantly. Just because a couple people don't like it doesn't mean anything really when it gets to the full body. So it's something to really, really, really worthwhile to fight for. It makes a much more transparent process, and it gives every elected representative a lot more power.
Absolutely. Right now, we're at the point of we're just looking for amendments that affect code that we can open up. Like today, we had a big floor fight, which we lost, but we fought anyhow on the rules around data centers because there was no protection for private wells. There was no protection for property rights. There was no protection for your Fourth Amendment rights. So the NSA could not use these data centers to spy on us unconstitutionally. And they took away all local control. So we tried to build all that back in, the right of self-determination at the local level, whether or not, the residents want these things there. We lost, we fought for hours on the floor, but we got the roll call vote.
Yeah, that's what's important at the beginning. If you can't get a bill passed, at least get a roll call to build for the future. Well, keep up the good work. Tell people how they can find you.
I'm easy to find. If you just look up Chris Anders for state delegate, you'll find me on Facebook. Or I'm very vocal on my private page too. It's S.Chris Anders. And also, if you go to my website, it's Anders4WV.com. I'm easy to be tracked down. You can just Google my name, Chris Anders, West Virginia. You'll have my phone number. You'll have my email. I will answer. I even answer all the hate mails. So I'm glad to talk to anybody.
Good for you. Well, thank you for coming on. You have a good night.
Okay, thank you so much, Melissa. You too.
Well, that is it for the Liberty Lobbyist. You can find me on X at Melissa Blasek NH or at Rebuild NH. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, you can email me director@rebuildnh.com. Until next time.